Happy Days was one of TV's most beloved shows, running for over a decade and turning its cast into stars. But as the seasons went on, some familiar faces vanished. Why did these actors leave? What really happened behind the scenes? Join us as we uncover the real reasons they walked away. Ron Howard. Ron Howard was the heart of Happy Days from the very beginning. For the first few seasons, Richie was the center of the show, the character through which audience experienced the ups and downs of teenage life. But as the years passed, things started to change. The focus of the show gradually shifted, and Howard found himself feeling sidelined in the very show that had once revolved around his character. One of the biggest reasons for this shift was the explosion of Henry Winkler's popularity as Fonzie. At first, Fonzie was just the cool older friend, someone who offered advice and helped Richie navigate life, but audiences couldn't get enough of him. His catchphrases, his smooth confidence, and his leather jacket made him a breakout star. As Fonzie became the most popular character, the show leaned more and more into his storylines, often pushing Richie into the background. This change didn't sit well with Howard, who had started to feel like he was no longer a priority in the series. Things reached a point where ABC even considered renaming the show to Fonzie's Happy Days, a move that Howard strongly opposed. He had been the main character from the start, and the idea of taking a back seat in his own show was frustrating. At the same time, Howard had other ambitions. He had been acting since he was a child, appearing in The Andy Griffith Show as Little Opie Taylor before he even reached double digits. But acting wasn't his only dream. He wanted to be a director, and by the late 1970s, he was already thinking about moving behind the camera full-time. He had started directing small projects and was eager to do more. But as long as he was committed to Happy Days, his schedule wouldn't allow it. He was stuck in a role that no longer excited him, in a show where he felt increasingly overlooked, and with a passion that was pulling him in a different direction. By the end of the 7th season, Howard made his decision. He would leave Happy Days and fully focus on his directing career. His departure was a big deal, and it wasn't just a clean break. The show had to find a way to explain why Richie Cunningham, the boy audiences had watched grow up, was suddenly gone. The solution was to send Richie off to join the army, a storyline that played out over a few episodes. It was an emotional farewell, especially because he wasn't leaving alone. Don Most, who played Ralph Malph, was also written out at the same time. Their departure marked the end of an era for Happy Days, and the show was never quite the same without them. Howard's decision to leave turned out to be the best move he could have made. After walking away from acting, he poured all his energy into directing and quickly found success. Just a few years later, he directed Splash, a romantic comedy starring Tom Hanks, which became a huge hit. From there, his career skyrocketed. He went on to direct blockbuster films like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and The Da Vinci Code. He won an Academy Award for Best Director and became one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. If he had stayed on Happy Days, his directing career might never have taken off the way it did. Looking back, Howard has said he doesn't regret leaving, even though it was a difficult decision at the time. He knew he had to take a risk and follow his passion. And while Happy Days continued for several more seasons without him, it was clear that something was missing. Richie Cunningham had been the heart of the show, and when he left, it lost some of its original charm. But in the end, his departure was necessary, both for the show's evolution and for Howard's career. He went from being a beloved television star to one of the most influential directors in Hollywood, proving that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest success. Don Most. Don Most played Ralph Malph, the goofy, fun-loving friend who was always ready with a joke, even if his punchlines didn't always land. From the very beginning of Happy Days, Ralph was part of Richie Cunningham's close-knit group, alongside Patsy Weber and later the ever-cool Fonzie. He was the kind of guy who thought he was a ladies' man but rarely succeeded, and his humor often got him into trouble. His famous line, "I still got it," became a fan favorite, even when it was clear that Ralph didn't always have it. But as the seasons passed, things started to shift, and Don Most found himself feeling like his character wasn't growing in the way he had hoped. At first, Happy Days focused on Richie, Ralph, and Patsy, capturing their adventures as teenagers navigating high school and dating. But as Fonzie's popularity skyrocketed, the dynamic of the show changed. Ralph, who had once been a major part of the group, started getting less screen time. His character wasn't evolving, and the writing often left him in the same place, cracking jokes but not getting much substance beyond that. Most had ambitions beyond Happy Days. He wanted to take on different roles, ones that would challenge him and showcase his range as an actor. But the longer he stayed on the show, the harder it became to break free from the goofy sidekick image. By the time the 7th season rolled around, he knew it was time to move on. He decided not to renew his contract, choosing instead to step away from the role that had made him famous. The writers gave Ralph Malph a send-off by having him, along with Richie, leave for the Army. It was a bittersweet moment for fans who had watched the trio of Richie, Ralph, and Patsy for so many years. With two of the core characters gone, the show had to reinvent itself once again. After leaving Happy Days, Don Most worked hard to prove he was more than just the class clown. He took on guest roles in various television shows and even pursued voice acting. In later years, he shifted towards directing and singing, showing a completely different side of himself. While he will always be remembered as Ralph Malph, his departure from Happy Days was about taking control of his career and refusing to be stuck in one role forever. Anson Williams. Anson Williams played Patsy Weber, Richie Cunningham's goofy but lovable best friend. From the very first season of Happy Days, he was part of the group that included Richie and Ralph Malph. Patsy was known for being a little clueless but always well-meaning. He had a big heart, a cheerful personality, and a dream of becoming a singer. Throughout the early seasons, he was often the comic relief, getting into silly situations and providing some of the funniest moments on the show. But as Happy Days evolved, Patsy's role started to shrink. In the beginning, he was one of the main characters, always involved in the biggest storylines. He was part of Richie's world, navigating high school, dating, and teenage life. But as the show went on, new characters were introduced, and the focus shifted. Unlike Richie and Ralph, who had clear storylines and character growth, Patsy became more of a background character. He was still around, still cracking jokes, but he wasn't driving the story the way he once had. By the later seasons, Patsy was almost unrecognizable from the character fans had come to love. He had gone from being Richie's best friend to someone who barely interacted with the main cast. When Richie and Ralph left the show after the 7th season, things only got worse for Patsy. With his closest friends gone, he had no real connection to the remaining characters. He was still technically a regular cast member, but his appearances became fewer and fewer. His role had been reduced to short scenes, usually delivering a funny line and then disappearing. Anson Williams was frustrated with how little his character was being used. He had been with Happy Days from the start, but as the seasons passed, he felt like he was being pushed aside. He had ambitions beyond just acting and had already started directing episodes of the show. Seeing the writing on the wall, he made the decision to step away from acting and focus on directing full-time. While he never got a big farewell episode like Richie or Ralph, his presence faded until he was no longer part of the show's final seasons. His decision to move into directing turned out to be a smart one. After Happy Days, Williams went on to direct episodes of many successful television shows, including Beverly Hills, 90210, Melrose Place, and Baywatch. While he may not have had the same level of fame as Ron Howard in the directing world, he built a strong career behind the camera. Looking back, it was clear that his time on Happy Days had run its course, but leaving the show allowed him to find success in a new way. Pat Morita. Pat Morita brought something special to Happy Days when he stepped into the role of Arnold Takahashi, the friendly and humorous owner of Arnold's Drive-In. His character wasn't just a background figure, he became a key part of the show's charm, offering funny one-liners, giving advice to the younger characters, and adding a unique personality to the gang's favorite hangout spot. His warm but comedic presence made him a fan favorite. But despite his popularity, Morita didn't stay on the show for long. After just 3 seasons, he left, leaving many fans wondering why. The main reason for his departure was an opportunity that seemed too good to pass up. In 1976, Morita was offered his own television show, Mr. T and Tina, a sitcom about a Japanese inventor struggling to balance his work and family life in America. It was a groundbreaking moment, because it was one of the first network sitcoms centered around an Asian American lead character. For Morita, this was a huge step forward. As an actor of Japanese descent, leading his own show was a rare opportunity in Hollywood, so he took the risk and left Happy Days to pursue it. Unfortunately, Mr. T and Tina didn't take off the way everyone had hoped. The show struggled to find an audience and was canceled after just 5 episodes. It was a disappointing turn of events, but Morita wasn't one to dwell on failure. He continued working in television, taking on guest roles in various shows while keeping his career moving forward. Even though Happy Days had already replaced his character with Al Del Vecchio, played by Al Molinaro, Morita was still fond of his time on the show. He eventually made a return in later seasons, stepping back into his role as Arnold as if he had never left. His comeback was welcomed by fans, proving that his character had left a lasting impression. But Morita's biggest career breakthrough was still ahead of him. In 1984, he landed the role that would define his legacy, Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid. The wise and patient karate master became one of the most beloved characters in movie history, and Morita's performance earned him an Academy Award nomination. It was a defining moment that showed his true range as an actor, far beyond just comedy. Looking back, his departure from Happy Days may have seemed like a misstep at the time, but it led him to something even greater. Leaving for Mr. T and Tina didn't work out, but it pushed him to new opportunities, and ultimately to the role that made him an icon. His time on Happy Days was just one chapter in a long and successful career, proving that sometimes, even when things don't go as planned, the right opportunity is still waiting around the corner. Erin Moran. Erin Moran grew up in front of the camera. Long before she became Joni Cunningham, she had already been acting in movies and television shows since she was a little girl. But it was Happy Days that made her a household name. As Richie Cunningham's younger sister, Joni started off as the typical kid sister, curious, annoying, and always eager to be part of whatever was happening. Over time, though, she became more than just Richie's little sister. She had her own storylines, her own personality, and eventually her own romance with Chachi Arcola, played by Scott Baio. Fans loved their relationship, and it wasn't long before network executives saw an opportunity to give them their own show. In the early 1980s, after several seasons of Happy Days, the network decided to launch a spin-off called Joni Loves Chachi. The idea was simple. Joni and Chachi moved to Chicago to try and make it as musicians while navigating their relationship. The studio had high hopes for the show, especially since Baio and Moran were popular with younger audiences. But despite the buzz, Joni Loves Chachi didn't live up to expectations. It ran for only 2 seasons before being canceled. Moran later said she never really wanted to leave Happy Days in the first place. She was happy playing Joni and didn't see the need to branch out into a separate show. But television executives had other plans, and since she was under contract, she didn't have much of a choice. When Joni Loves Chachi was canceled, she and Baio returned to Happy Days for the final season. But by then, things had changed. The show had been on the air for a decade, and many of the original cast members were already gone. The energy wasn't the same, and Joni's return didn't have the impact the producers had hoped for. After Happy Days officially ended in 1984, Moran struggled to find steady work. Unlike some of her co-stars, who successfully transitioned into new roles, she had difficulty shaking off the image of Joni Cunningham. Hollywood is tough on actors who become too closely associated with a single role, and Moran found herself typecast. Offers didn't come in the way she had hoped, and over time, she faded from the spotlight. In later years, she opened up about the struggles she faced after Happy Days. Without steady work, she faced financial difficulties and personal challenges. She made occasional appearances on reality shows and gave interviews about her time on the iconic sitcom, but she never found another role that defined her career the way Joni Cunningham did. Sadly, her story had a tragic ending. In 2017, she passed away at the age of 56 after battling cancer. Many of her former co-stars shared emotional tributes, remembering her not just as Joni, but as a friend and colleague who had been a part of something special. Her time on Happy Days may have been the peak of her career, but it left a lasting legacy. To this day, fans still remember Joni Cunningham as the spunky, lovable little sister who grew up right before their eyes. Al Molinaro. Al Molinaro became a fan favorite on Happy Days as Al Del Vecchio, the warm-hearted and slightly quirky owner of Arnold's Diner. He joined the show in its 4th season, replacing Pat Morita's character, Arnold, and quickly became a beloved part of the cast. With his friendly nature, signature catchphrase, "Yup, yup, yup," and his constant struggle to keep the diner running smoothly, Al Molinaro brought a unique charm that fit perfectly into the world of Happy Days. He wasn't just a business owner, he was part of the Cunningham family's extended circle, often offering advice to Richie, Joni, and their friends, while also dealing with his own romantic misadventures. Molinaro had spent years working in smaller roles before landing Happy Days, and for him, the show was a dream come true. He was older than most of the cast, already in his mid-50s when he joined, and his background was different from many of his co-stars. Before acting, he had worked various jobs and didn't get his big break until much later in life. So when Happy Days made him a recognizable television star, he was grateful for the opportunity. Since Joni Loves Chachi was already in motion, producers focused on assembling a strong supporting cast. Al Molinaro's Al Del Vecchio was an obvious choice, given his established presence at Arnold's Diner. Carrying him over as Chachi's uncle felt like a natural fit for the spin-off. Molinaro agreed to make the move, but it was a gamble. Joni Loves Chachi was a high-profile project, but there was no guarantee it would succeed. When the show premiered in 1982, it had a decent start, partly because of the popularity of its two leads. However, it quickly struggled to find an audience. The chemistry between Joni and Chachi worked well on Happy Days, but on their own, the characters didn't have enough to keep viewers interested. The show lasted only 2 seasons before being canceled, and with it, Molinaro's role as a regular cast member came to an end. After the failure of Joni Loves Chachi, Molinaro returned to Happy Days for its final seasons. However, the show was already past its peak. Many of the original cast members were gone, ratings were declining, and it was clear that the series was winding down. He stuck with it until the very end, staying loyal to the show that had given him the biggest role of his career. Even after Happy Days ended in 1984, Molinaro remained closely tied to it. He appeared in commercials and reunions, and in the early 1990s, he reprised his role as Al Del Vecchio in a nostalgic advertisement for a fast food chain. Fans never forgot his lovable personality, and he continued to be recognized as Al long after he left television. Molinaro often spoke about how grateful he was for the opportunity Happy Days gave him. Unlike many actors who start young, he had built his career later in life, and playing Al Del Vecchio gave him a level of fame he never expected. Though he eventually stepped away from acting, he remained proud of his time on the show and appreciated the lasting impact it had on his life. His departure from Happy Days wasn't due to creative differences or frustration. It was simply a result of a failed spin-off and the natural end of the series. But even though he left, his presence as the kind-hearted diner owner remained one of the most memorable parts of Happy Days. Scott Baio. Scott Baio played Chachi Arcala, the charming, yet sometimes naive young man who entered Happy Days as Joni Cunningham's boyfriend. His character was introduced in the 5th season, and from the start, Chachi was portrayed as a bit of a misfit, earnest but clueless about the ways of the world. Chachi's awkward yet endearing qualities quickly made him a fan favorite. But it wasn't long before the show began to rely more heavily on his character. The real turning point for Baio came when the spin-off Joni Loves Chachi was created. The show, which centered on Chachi and Joni as they pursued a career in music, was meant to capture the chemistry between the two characters and spin it into a new story. For Baio, this was a big opportunity to step out of the shadow of Happy Days and become a lead in his own series. The idea was that fans would follow him and Joni to their new show, where they could continue to explore their relationship and their musical dreams. While the spin-off didn't succeed, it still marked a critical moment in Baio's career. When the show ended, Happy Days was in its later seasons, and the show's focus had already started to shift toward other characters, particularly Fonzie. Baio's character, Chachi, became more of a secondary figure, and by the time he returned to Happy Days for the final seasons, it was clear that the show was heading toward its end. Despite Joni Loves Chachi's failure, Baio continued to work in television and film. He wasn't just known for his time on Happy Days, he went on to star in the hit series Charles in Charge in the 1980s, where he played a college student who became the live-in caretaker for a family. The show was successful and gave Baio another opportunity to showcase his acting talent. While Joni Loves Chachi didn't work out, his role in Charles in Charge became another defining part of his career. Looking back, Baio has often said that leaving Happy Days and taking on Joni Loves Chachi was a natural progression for him, but it didn't mean the end of his connection to the show. He always had fond memories of working with the cast and recalled the strong friendships he formed on set. Even after Joni Loves Chachi was canceled, he He stayed in touch with his co-stars from Happy Days, and his return to the show's final seasons was something fans appreciated, even though the show had changed in many ways by then. Baio's departure from Happy Days wasn't a dramatic one. He simply moved on to other projects, following the natural course of his career. His time on Happy Days helped launch his career and solidified his place in television history, while his later work, especially Charles in Charge, gave him another chance to shine. He might not have stayed for the entire run of Happy Days, but his legacy on the show was important, and he remained a recognizable face in entertainment for years to come. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.